All right, welcome back. How is everybody today? I normally don't do a syllabus day because I don't believe in them, but as a result of the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in, and because I wasn't sure that all of the technology would be working in this room, and for a variety of other reasons, I am broadcasting this live on YouTube so that the people in the extended classroom can watch it, because I wasn't sure how well WebEx would work in here. We're having problems with the camera. So the reason I'm saying this is that I do need to point out that on the D2L site, hopefully this will work. On the D2L site, I have posted the syllabus, and there is a syllabus acknowledgement and consent form. So if you're in the witness protection program, you might want to go to the extended section because this will be broadcast on YouTube and that may not work out. Although with the face masks, perhaps the mob won't be able to, do facial recognition and figure out where you're at if that applies to you. But I do need everybody to go on, take the little survey, use the consent form, and that would be great. I don't know how long we'll be going face-to-face because the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill lasted one entire week before they had to close the campus back down as a result of outbreaks. OSU currently has one sorority house that has 23 new cases of COVID, so I imagine that they will probably be shutting their campus down very shortly, and I have no idea how long we will last here at UCO. So if that does occur, luckily for you, because I've always done this, recorded the videos in the past, I have hours and hours of lectures, so you can actually watch my plangent rantings, when we actually have to go back to being fully online. So I just point that out. I'm not going to go over the syllabus. I assume that everyone can read, and that's great. So any questions about that? Fantastic. So I normally start out, and what I'm going to do for those people in the extended section today, currently, if you want to participate and earn bonus points, and I don't see anybody in that section, you may text me. We'll see how well this works. I've got my phone in my hot little hands here. And the rest of you are welcome to text me as well at any time. Let me write my phone number up here so that they can get it. It's 405-414-7054. So if you are in the extended section and watching this on YouTube or on WebEx, you're welcome to text me with your answers because there's opportunities for bonus points to be won. So those of you who are face-to-face, I'll just ask you to come up after the class and get those. So for those of you that are in the extended section, please feel free to participate by texting, and we'll see how this works. If this doesn't work out, I will figure out something else to do. Normally, what I do is I start out by having you break up into groups, develop a brand identity for your group, a brand name, and then I'd start with a critical thinking challenge, but because that violates all kinds of social distancing, to have you get in little groups in the corner of the room, I guess we'll just have to do that individually. So I apologize. It's going to be an interesting experience for me teaching this way because it's not the way I normally teach. I normally have lots of critical thinking challenges for you to do, and we talk about them, but that's not possible in the age of COVID. So we need to start talking about marketing and why you're all here for this class today, Tuesday, a week earlier than we were supposed to be, right? We weren't supposed to start until the 24th, and they moved everything up a week. And so you got cheated out of 1 week of summer. Now you're back and eager and ready to learn all about marketing. So we need to start by talking about sort of a history of the discipline. And one thing that I'll ask you is, given the fact that everything is completely novel in an age of COVID, including the way we're now teaching with being able to go on WebEx and YouTube and, have students text in questions to the professor by using their cell phones, is a history of the marketing discipline beneficial, or should we just forget it because everything is completely new in this highly technically sophisticated and culturally aware world? Yes or no? You don't think a history of marketing? Who said no? Oh, you think that a history of marketing is actually important to the discipline, even given the fact that we've got these things that are great sanitizing wipes here to keep you all safe. And that's a relatively modern thing. These, in the past, if you wanted to sterilize something, what did you do? You what? You boiled it. Alcohol would kill. Those are alcohol wipes. Aren't they convenient? You no longer, we would have to have a big pot in the back of the room and a fire and boil everything to get it sterile. Now we just have these wipes. So how could a history be at all relevant? How many of you remember you had to take at some point in time in your college career, you had to take a history course? Probably, you have to take 2, don't you? You have to take 2 history courses, like U.S. government from, and then one other, you could take world history, or you can take European history, I suppose. We've got one person who's participating who says, yes, it's beneficial because you still need to know about the history of marketing and you need to know all the important bits and pieces. Okay, it's important to know how we got to this point, I suppose, that, how do we get to the point where we can mass produce this kind of stuff and make it readily available? I think that's important. So I generally think that a history of marketing is important, but I also didn't start out as a marketing professor. I actually started out across the parking lot in what I now lovingly refer to as the land of hippy dippy. That would be the College of Liberal Arts, and I was a political science professor over there. So I started out my academic career over there. Then I trotted off and got a PhD in marketing because marketers make more money than the people over there do, and I wanted to make more money. So, I thought that was great. The average starting salary for a marketing professor this year is $160,000. Not bad for 9 months worth of work, right? Marketing professors work 24/7. We work about 7 months a year, 24 hours a month, so there you go. It's pretty good pay if you can get it. So I started out as a political scientist, and as a political scientist, history is kind of important. And you could understand that. If you're a historian, you can kind of understand how that would be important. But marketers, like everything is, this is a brave new world, how we're going to engage in public selling. But I do think it is important. And particularly since I started out as sort of a historian and political scientist, I'm going to make an argument that, it's important that we know something about the history of marketing. So when we think about marketing, there are 2 ways that we should think about it. We should think about marketing as an academic discipline, which is very modern. It's very new. And we should also think about it as a social activity. As a social activity, marketing has ancient roots. As an academic discipline, the earliest marketing departments really start to form in colleges in the United States at about the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Now, why is this important? Well, if you went to college historically, if we went back in time, universities didn't teach things like marketing. If we go back to ancient times, to ancient Greece, the first foundings of academies, or what we might recognize as being schools, were founded by Socrates' most famous student, Plato, the Academy, and Aristotle's Lyceum, right? And those institutions were really concerned with sort of what we might think of as being grand theories of knowledge, big theories of knowledge. And what do I mean by big theories of knowledge? The first fully worked out, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about ethics, the first fully worked out system of philosophy is really Plato's Republic, in my opinion. In that it answers three questions. The question of knowledge, what is it I can know and how can I know it? We'll talk more about that. It turns out that this is not as easy as we think it is. The question of conduct, how should we behave and organize ourselves? And the question of governance. What we deal with in marketing are more mid-range theories. They're not trying to explain how is it we can know what we can know, what is the correct conduct, and then the question of governance. We're more concerned with people's behavior and more mundane and routine things. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But just recognize that these are sort of mid-range theories, not grand level theories. And we'll talk more about theory development when we talk about ethics. But the reason all of this is important is because as we think about the history of marketing, we notice certain patterns emerging that explain why people behave the way they do in a market. And so the academic study of marketing starts to recognize this at the beginning of the 20th century, but the way people behaved was engaging in marketing for a very long time. And so the oldest theory in marketing is what we might call the production era or the production theory. And it can be summed up by a line from a very old movie now called The Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. And I always ask students how many of you, this is a really ancient film at this point. And it's amazing to me how many students have seen that movie. If you're a sports enthusiast, you've probably seen the movie. The line in the movie is, if you build it, they will come. He builds a baseball diamond out in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa or someplace like that. And the ball players just start showing up. Ghosts of ball players, I guess, start showing up, right? If you build it, they will come. For most of recorded history, we don't know where the first civilization started exactly. We have ideas based on the anthropological or archaeological record, but we don't have absolute knowledge of where the first societies. We think that it probably started in Mesopotamia, where man becomes a social creature and starts to establish a society. But once he does, we don't know where the first one is, but once he does do this, he begins to engage in marketing. We begin to start specializing in things. If I have some chickens and you have a cow, you might want some eggs and I might want some milk. And we start exchanging things. And for most of human history, that was enough. If you sort of had something that was at all useful, people would buy it. You could put it out there. The classic example of this is Henry Ford's Model T vehicle, right? You could have a Model T in any color you wanted so long as that color was black. That was the only, and people bought it. People bought the Model T. Why? Why did they buy it? I mean, how many of you want a black car? It was the only color. It was not the only car. There were other but they were largely very expensive items for wealthy people that were novelties. Cars were. They didn't have massive interstate highway systems and things like that. The Ford Model T is the first mass-produced automobile for a big audience, and people bought it, even though it was black. How many of you want a black car? Somebody raised their hand. Why on earth would you want a black car?
I own a black car right now, and my first car was a black car, and I don't know, they just seem to kind of, I mean, yeah, they get very hot in Oklahoma summers.
Uh-huh.
But then it also retains the heat in Oklahoma winters, which is nice.
Okay.
And I don't know, I like my black car. It doesn't really look as dirty as other colors do.
Oh, that's where you're wrong. In Oklahoma, with the wind comes sweeping down the plains, black attracts that red dust, settles in a fine layer over a black car, and you're constantly having to wash it. Cars should be white in Oklahoma. Every car should be white. It reflects the light. It doesn't show dirt as much as the black car does. Trust me on this. White is the optimal color for cars in Oklahoma.
See, my mom always told me growing up, she said, don't buy a white car because it'll show the dirt.
No, it doesn't show dirt. It just far less than black cars do. You know. No, it just doesn't show dirt as much. I mean, the black will show everything on it. The red dirt, it just does, right? In Oklahoma, really, trust me, I've always driven white. My big white pickup is sitting out there. It's a dually in the parking lot, you know. And when it oxidizes, it's the same color. When your clear coat goes to hell, it's the same. It's white, right? That's great. In Oklahoma, they oxidize quickly because of the heat. Paint jobs don't last long here. But you can see how, we have this disagreement about something as simple as cars, but for most of human history, if you mass-produced a black car, it was going to sell because it was better than the horse that people had in their barn. Now, we started to get variants when people entered into the market in more and more numbers. So we go from this production era where we have barter, and if you build it, they will come, to what happens? Well, the Dodge brothers enter into the marketing of automobiles, the mass production of automobiles, and all of a sudden you can no longer just sell black cars. You got to have different kinds of cars and different features on cars, and cars become more differentiated from each other. And so we get the sales era. Now, this era of marketing is the era that most of you get your bad ideas about marketing from, or your bad connotations or feelings about salespeople from this era, right? And I say that, and I want you to know that we have a sales program. So I'm engaging in a negative sell here, and I am one of the coaches for our competitive sales team here at UCO. And I think if you were smart, you might want to consider getting a major in professional sales, because we have the only major and minor on campus that can say we have near 100% placement at graduation of our majors and minors. And about 80% of our majors and minors earn at or more than 6 figures in their first year. Right? So it's a good program. We have a good team. We go to competitions. We win at competitions. We are one of the top sales schools in the country. We are a top 5 sales school. And inevitably, students tell me, I don't want to go into sales. And the reason they don't want to go into sales is because of this era. What happens when we start to ramp up production of all this stuff? Well, it's no longer good enough to just put your product out there and have people come buy it. Now you're going to have to do something more. And so you start getting salespeople, and companies hired them, and they traveled around the country selling all kinds of stuff door to door. Nobody sells stuff door to door anymore. Very few products are sold door to door. I think Avon still has some door-to-door representatives, but for the most part, nobody sells door-to-door. But that was not the case beginning in about the 1920s when we started mass producing goods. Women, for example, were largely at home during the day, and so people would come by with vacuum cleaners. The vacuum cleaner salesman would have his models loaded up in his trunk, and he'd come in and he would sell. Companies that are still around today started out this way. A vacuum cleaner company called Electrolux. And Electrolux now makes all kinds of other stuff, but they originally started out door-to-door sales. I remember when my mother bought her first Electrolux vacuum cleaner. They lasted forever. They were a good product, but it was sold by a guy who was going around the neighborhood. Rainbow vacuum cleaners were sold that way. Fuller brushes were sold door to door. Fuller Brush Company is still in existence today. They're sold door to door. And the reason people sort of get a bad idea about salesmen is because what they did is really engaged in the AIDA model, which stands for awareness, interest, desire, and action. And then they left. They sold you the vacuum cleaner, and they went on down the road. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, if you have less than stellar products, you might get to thinking, who was the face of the company that sold you that product? And for those of you that just texted me and said you can't see the board, it's AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, action. You blame the salesman, right? You sold me this crappy vacuum cleaner. Electroluxes were actually good vacuum cleaners, by the way, but and it's not working, and what do I do? And the salesman has gone on, right? He wants to get a commission, and he's moved on down the road. And that's what people think of as being salesmen. They don't recognize that there's a whole business-to-business context out there that we can engage in, and that's primarily where our students go, is in the business-to-business world. But we have 2 big furniture stores here in Oklahoma. One has started advertising in response to the other one because of this attitude that people have towards salesmen. How many of you have been to Mathis Brothers? It's not necessarily a pleasant experience. No. Right? So Bob Mills has come out with the anti-salesman slogan. And what's Bob Mills' new slogan? Forever and ever, when I was growing up as a kid here in Oklahoma, Bob Mills' slogan was the working man's friend. He's now dropped that, and he's got another slogan. What is it? No shopper stalkers, right? The anti-salesman position. Now, one of the things, when we talk about these philosophies, so we say that like the production era ended in about 1920, there are still companies that use the production philosophy in their marketing. How many of you have an iPhone? Almost everyone has an iPhone. Steve Jobs, when he was in charge of Apple, didn't engage in what we might consider good marketing practice. Steve Jobs' attitude was, you don't know what you want. I will tell you what you want and you will buy it. That's a production philosophy, even in a very high-tech company. And for the most part, he was right. Right? I mean, we all bought this device. We all bought this iPhone. That's a production. Microsoft produces enormously crappy operating systems that 90% of the world still uses. Why? There's nothing else. There's very limited amounts in that market. And that works in technology markets where you don't have a lot of players. You know, what's the alternative to this? There are a couple of other OSs out there. There's Droid. And what else? Huh? Samsung, isn't that Droid?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's a Droid operating. There is a Microsoft OS for phones. You can get a Windows. How popular is that? Not very, right? So there's not a whole lot of competition, so you can get away with it in that instance. We still see the sales philosophy, even though we say it ended in about 1960. My favorite activity in the fall has been canceled. I am highly, highly disappointed that the state fair has been preempted this year. I love the fair. I get a season pass to go to the fair every year, and I love it because I was a farm kid, becoming fewer and fewer of those. It used to be when I started teaching here 26 or 27 years ago, that I would say, how many of you grew up on a farm? And lots of students would raise their hand. Almost no one raises their hand anymore, a farm or ranch. So I love the fair because of that, because I grew up in FFA and 4-H and all of that. But I also love it as a marketer because it's fascinating to me what people would rather have than their own money. And the fair is a prime example of where you can go to see what people would rather have than their own money. They sell all kinds of stuff at the fair, right? And they're using a sales philosophy. They're using this, they have their little headset on with a microphone and a boom box, and they sit there and they try to sell you Ginsu knives or the latest stainless steel pan that will not, stick, which, by the way, all stainless steel pans start out and they don't stick for about 3 times of cooking on them. And then after that, they start to stick. Why is that? When the stainless steel comes out of the manufacturer, it's polished. It doesn't have any little nicks in it. But once you start cooking on it, it gets it, and that's what sort of destroys that finish, and then they become sticky. You have to use oil. But right now, then they're going to tell you about how great this pan and why it's different, and you'll buy it, and in 2 weeks, they'll be gone to the next fair, right? And you're stuck with some crappy pans that don't live up to the hype that they pitched. So you still see the sales philosophy used in a lot of places. It's one of the reasons that people have, when I talk about our sales program, their image is either Mathis Brothers or it's a car salesman, right? And everybody who goes to buy a car, anybody love that experience? Just have a great time buying a car? No, it's a miserable experience. And that's what their impression is. And it's largely as a result of this. It was that just get the awareness, get their interest, create a desire, get the money, and going down the road. And what happens after the fair is over in 2 weeks? The fair season starts earlier the further north you go. So the Iowa State Fair, for example, is a big deal. And in politics, the year before there's a general election for president, the Iowa State Fair, all of the candidates make it to the Iowa State Fair, and it happens in, I think, early August, maybe late July. The Iowa State Fair is a big deal. And then the further south you come in, Oklahoma wins the fair here. Well, it's in September. If you go to Texas, it's in October. And if you go to Louisiana, their state fair is actually at the end of October and early November. And why is that? Well, it's because state fairs happened as people were bringing in their crops and highlighting, the fall harvest. And so you can start at one fair with your Ginsu knife collection and you can use the Iowa Fair and then work your way down, and you're gone after 2 weeks. And the customer is left with, a less than stellar product. But you don't care, because next year, and I've noticed this phenomenon at the state fair, they'll sell stainless steel pots and pans one year, and then the next year they're back. It's the same person, same booth, but they're selling something completely different. Because they've recognized that all their customers are mad, and they've got to come up with a new something to hawk. So we still see this being used, although if you go into our sales program, we're going to try and teach you how not to be that kind of salesperson. Now, at this point, I have a couple of questions for which you can get bigger bonus points. Is marketing an art or a science? And normally I have you break up into groups at this point and then come up with 3 examples to justify your position, but I'm only going to make you come up with one. So is marketing an art or a science? Anybody? Is it both? Why do you think it's both?
It could come to be an art because if you don't know how to talk, how to explain something to somebody to get your point across when you don't really know what to do. And it's a science also because you have to know what's out there, how to sell to somebody, and what the numbers should be to get the company.
Okay. So you think that, don't let me put words in your mouth. You think that things like professional selling are an art?
It can be.
Okay. Go ahead.
If you're charismatic, then it's an art.
If you're charismatic, it's an art.
If you're not charismatic, it's a science.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. Marketing is a science. You have to know how people think to take advantage of that knowledge. Okay. If you want to manipulate people, that psychology, marketing is made up of 2 foundational disciplines, both of which I will make merciless fun of throughout the course of this semester. And what are those 2 foundational disciplines? One is psychology, which is the closest thing to which, although they think it's a science, it's the closest thing to witchcraft we teach on a college campus. Lie down on the couch and tell me what you think. Ooh, let me interpret that. Right? There is some science, and we are understanding more and more about the mind and, behavior studies and things like that. So the other foundational discipline is economics, which is oftentimes referred to as the dreaded science or the dark science, because it's not always pleasant, particularly when you have things like depressions and recessions and predicting those kinds of things. Economists are also notoriously bad at actually predicting anything. They're good at explaining what happened after it happened, but notoriously bad at predicting. And I don't really view that as a science. I view that as a history. Hindsight is always 20/20, right? But anyway, so those are the 2 foundational disciplines. So, marketing is a science. You said that if you're charismatic, it's an art. If you're not charismatic, it's a science. So I guess what you're saying is that if you are a salesperson and you don't have a lot of charisma, you're going to have to rely on facts and figures and actual knowledge and content in order to get your point across. Whereas if you're charismatic, maybe people will just buy things from you. Okay. Okay. I'll buy that. Let's see, what else have we got? It's both an art and a science. You need to know the tricks of the trade and the way things are sold and the way buyers look at those objects. You also need to be good at communicating with people, and that's an art. You need to be emotionally and physically involved in the product and the consumer. I think that's all good examples of how it can be an art. And then of course, the studying the consumers can be a science. So is everything on a college campus either an art or a science? Is everything either an art or a science? Or are they all something like both? Let's think about academic disciplines. So I told you that if we go back in time, marketing is not going to be represented at academies across Europe, where Western civilization largely develops the institution of the university, right? The three things that you went to university for historically, universities, after we get out of the ancient world and we get into, the Middle Ages and then the Renaissance, institutions of higher education form as products of the Catholic Church largely. And they are places where you go to learn one of the three learned professions, which is the priesthood. So they start out as ways of transmitting knowledge about theology. So that's probably the oldest in terms of historic professions that you went to university for. The priesthood. Following that was law. That was the second oldest profession. And law goes along with the priesthood, right? Because historically, there was no separation between church and state. That's a very contemporary phenomenon. And in fact, in many countries today, there is still no separation between church and state. The Queen of England is the head of the Church of England. She is the defender of the faith. They have an official religion in England. It's called the Church of England, right? And it is state supported to this day. And so you went to college to become a priest. Then the law was the next one, which was closely related to the priest because there was both canonical law and civil law, and there wasn't much distinction between those two. And then the third learned profession is medicine. That starts institutions of higher education. So is everything an art or a science then? Or is there some third category? You don't know? Are some things purely art and some things purely science?
Yeah.
Okay, what's purely an art? What? Dancing. Dancing is purely an art.
Singing.
Singing is purely an art.
It has a little bit of science, because you have to know the science of the body, for
Body
example,
one.
for dancing or singing.
Yeah, it's
or the chemistry between.
Yeah, one of the things that we're finding out is that computer programs can write music. There's a lot of math involved in actually what people like in terms of music. And you can get algorithms that will write basically music, to go along with lyrics that are more popular. It turns out one of the oldest things that we've said is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it turns out that's not true. We know that children, for example, in studies, will look at a symmetrical face far longer than they will look at an asymmetrical face. They will stare at a picture of Denzel Washington. Little babies will sit there and stare at a picture of Denzel Washington for a long time. You show them a picture of Lyle Lovett and they start crying. They turn away, right? So it's not clear to me that everything, in my class at 8 o'clock, one of the students said that language arts were purely an art. Writing, creative writing was purely. Turns out we can write computer programs that can grade essays with a high degree of accuracy. Because what is good communication has a tendency to have patterns to it. And computer programs, artificial intelligence, can pick up on that. and it's getting better all the time. There is sort of a third category, and it's pure logic. Mathematics, for example, abstract mathematics is pure logic. It has no basis in reality, but it is internally consistent, and it is maybe a third category. So what's the difference then between art and science? Then
Most art uses science, like the art forms that are like the ones that are really good know the science and how it works, and they apply it to their art.
okay, all right.
I tend to look at art with a more like qualitative view, while you look at sciences with a more quantitative view.
Okay, that's the big distinction that most people come up with. It's objective versus subjective. They say that art is subjective and science is objective, right? That seems to be the big difference between the two. And certainly this is a spectrum, right? Of purely subjective to purely objective. Now, what I would say, let's see. Science involves technique, art involves process. That's interesting. Science involves technique. Not sure what the difference is between technique and process. It seems like a technique could be a process. I think though we focus on this idea of subjectivity and objectivity more than anything else. But what we start to find out is that that line becomes very blurry because what we choose to study is inherently subjective. What I find important is inherently subjective, isn't it? Even though I study it from a scientific perspective where I start with observation, I notice some things, I make hypotheses, I test those hypotheses by gathering data, and then I make predictions based on that data collection, right? That's sort of the nuts and bolts of the scientific method. But what I choose to study is inherently subjective. Even though I'm going to do that in an objective, rational fashion, it is subjective. When I went and got my PhD, I went down to OU because I didn't want to leave the state. I had a nice job as an attorney, and I thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice to not be broke through a PhD program and continue to practice law? And the chair of the marketing department at OU, whose name is Pat Daugherty at the time, said, well, I noticed that you have a lot of teaching experience because I had been the university's attorney for a while, and I taught legal studies. And I said, yep, I sure do. And she said, well, we hope you don't continue that because teaching is something that one must endure in order to do research. That was her attitude. Teaching is something one must endure in order to do research. In other words, you all were just a big inconvenience to her. That's the way she looked at undergraduates. And I thought about that, and I thought, I don't want to write a marketing article that no one's going to read. And so the thing I'm going to study is how we effectively teach marketing to students. That's inherently subjective. I do these studies, I do these field experiments, and I see how people learn things like sales, what kind of techniques we can use to make somebody a better salesperson. But the reason that I'm interested in that is because if nothing else, if nobody else reads my paper, that influences the way I teach and the way I interact with students. And that's inherently a subjective desire, right? Old Pat Daugherty down at OU, well, she didn't care if anybody read her paper or not. She's just happy to come up with her little logistics study. How boring, right? But that's my own subjectivity. So what is the difference between art and science? Well, it's largely this distinction, but it's not as clear-cut as we might think it is. It's not as distinct a line as we used to believe that there was objectivity in science and subjectivity in art over here, and the two would never meet. That's not exactly true. So it's a lot more of a continuum and a lot more messy than we might have thought. But that brings me to my third era. This era, the marketing era, which begins in 1960 to about 1990, this is where we really develop marketing as a science, where we really begin to recognize that we can study consumers and the way things work and operate from a very scientific perspective. And it's led to all kinds of great advances. Why is it that we can have these things so quickly and at our disposal? Well, these are largely logistics studies that are scientific studies in how we move goods the most efficient to get them from producer to consumer in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of cost. That's science. Studying consumer behavior and psychology is science. And that's what the marketing era recognized, was we can make consumers a focus of scientific research. Now we've moved even beyond that into what we call the relationship era, or the era of value co-creation. So now it's not just enough to figure out what consumers want. And one of the things that students oftentimes say to me when I talk about this is they say, well, if marketing is so much of a science, and I will make a bold statement. Some of the things that we think of as being very much a science are really not, like medicine. We think of that as being very scientific. Turns out, one of my fields of research and one of my streams of research is looking at medical marketing and the efficacy of drugs. That's one of the things that I look at in research. And it turns out that those studies are not necessarily very well done all the time. And there's a lot of problems with drugs. Why is that? Well, because we can't completely randomize the studies. We can in marketing, however, completely randomize the studies and ensure that we get a really good sample. In medicine, you can't do that. We can't just pick you out one at a time, willy-nilly, randomly, by drawing lots and say, oh, you know what? We got this new COVID-19 vaccine. We're going to give it to you. I don't want the vaccine. Tough. Sorry, sucks to be you, but we're going to give you this and see if you die. See if you go into anaphylactic shock. We can't do that in medicine, but we can do it in marketing. We can absolutely randomize surveys and get very good results. And so students oftentimes push back and they'll say, well, if that's true, why is it that so many products and businesses fail? Something like 90% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. The reason that they fail is because they don't do marketing research, right? They don't study the consumer from a scientific perspective. That's not to mean that it can't be done. It's just that we have lots of companies that don't do it. And even big companies that should know better engage in this. And of course, there is always the risk of failure. Even after you've done good studies, there is the risk of failure. New Coke is an example of that. Pepsi-Cola did something called the Pepsi Challenge when I was, I think, in 5th or 6th grade. This was a big thing where they did blind taste tests, and a lot has been written about that and the problems with the taste test, but they determined overwhelmingly that people preferred Pepsi to Coke by a 2-to-1 margin. Now, what was wrong with the study? And as a result, largely of that, Coke decided that they were going to change their formula, and they came out with something called New Coke, which was horrible, and it didn't last very long, and people wanted the old Coke. Well, what they found out in looking at the past studies on this is that when Pepsi did the challenge, they gave you 1 ounce of Coke and 1 ounce of Pepsi, not a 12-ounce can, 1 ounce of each. And people do prefer a sweeter drink for 1 ounce. But after that, it gets to be too sickeningly sweet, right? Pepsi is sweeter than Coke. They also found out that Pepsi was manipulating the data by, in some instances, serving the Pepsi cold and the Coke at about room temperature, which would affect whether or not people preferred one or the other, right? So even then, you can do marketing studies and there can still be failure, but the more you do this and the more scientific that you get, the better off you are and the less chances of failure there are. But it's not just enough to do that. We now recognize that we have to have value co-creation. So from about 1990 to the present, we now engage the consumer in a way to ensure that not only are we producing what they want, but that we continue to develop them and maintain a relationship with them that's going to be longer than just, I'm going to sell you these goods and then I'm going to go on down the road, because customers have a lifetime value. Forever and ever, M&Ms, when I was growing up, were this coated chocolate candy. And their motto, when I was growing up, was melt in your mouth, not in your hands. And I can assure you that if you have sweaty little hands like I do, they'll melt. And eventually, not as fast as a Hershey bar will melt in your hands in Oklahoma, but they'll eventually melt in your hands if you've got enough sweat. But they came in, 5 or 6 colors. I remember when red M&Ms, because the dye that they were using, which was red dye, number 40 or something, they found out it was slightly toxic, and so they had to pull the red M&Ms off the shelf. Red food coloring was taken out of everything. Now I remember when they brought the red M&M back, that was a big deal. Now, but they were sold basically in little cellophane packages with 5 or 6 colors. Red came back, brown went out, whatever. And that's all you could do to get M&Ms. Now you can get M&Ms any way you want them. You can get all kinds of colors. They're not just bold colors. You can have pastel colors. You can get them in all kinds of different containers. They're no longer just cellophane. You can get them for your birthday, for your class party, graduation, anniversary, thank you gifts. Companies buy these with their logos on them. You can put your creepy picture on the M&Ms now. Customize it if you're getting engaged, you and your fiancé. That's Oklahoman for fiance. I have a whole Oklahoma to English dictionary. Your fiancé and you can get your creepy picture put on the M&Ms. And, isn't this great? This is value co-creation. You are engaging with the company and creating something more than it was before. And isn't that fantastic? So this is an example. Going beyond just studying the consumer, going beyond just getting their awareness to creating something with them. Dell did this. Dell was one of the first. This is called mass customization as well. Dell, you ordered a Dell and it was customized to you. Now, and there was a disintermediation of the channel, but now there's been a reintermediation. They recognize that a lot of people don't really care about getting a customized laptop. They just want to be able to go down to the store and experience the laptop and buy it. But still, Dell, you can customize your computer and order it online and get it built exactly the way you want it, right? So this is an example of value co-creation. This is what we strive for, and this is one of the things that we try to teach in our sales program, that students have to recognize it's no longer just enough to make a pitch and get some interest and get some action. You have to engage, and service after the sale becomes critical in that, right? It's not just about knowing what the consumer wants, it's also about how do you keep the consumer happy after that sale. And most things require some level of service after the sale. That's about where I got in my first class, so I'm trying to keep everybody together. So I'll stop there. If you feel horribly cheated by the fact that we're ending 15 minutes early, you let me know and we'll stay 15 minutes late on Thursday. Okay? All right. Oh, if you talked and gave me answers, come up so I can give you bonus points. For those of you on the extended classroom, I will do those as well based on your name. Be sure and send me the text with your name in it so that I can get those entered as well right now so that I don't forget. I think this is one, two, one.
Also find your angle on purpose. Could have been me.
All right, so again, the way this works is I'll add the bonus points to your exam, so then you've got to make sure that when I give you your exam scores that it reflects the bonus points as well. Okay, last name.
So my next class is on tutors now.
We shall see you.
Thank you.
All right, got it.
Appreciate it. Excuse me.
Haley.
Kilo, I'm gonna talk to.
What was the last name?
Kilo, Kelow. I'm right there, I see it. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Dean New.
Got it.
Thank you.
Gillespie.
All right. Yes, sir. Last name?
Brendan?
Got it. Thanks. I appreciate it.
With a minor in sales,
Mhm.
how, what classes, like how many hours is it?
I think the minor is it 18 hours? 15 hours. I'd have to look. Let me,
I need to look into it, because I'm actually, this past month, I got into a finance job with Primerica. And so I passed my state life insurance exam.
Uh-huh.
So like I'm licensed to sell life insurance and stuff, and so I would not be opposed if it fits to taking some sales classes.
Absolutely. I can,
So
let me just do this real quick and I can pull up the degree program. and let you know. Just one second. So,
yeah, I was late signing up for your class. I didn't sign up for it until like Saturday night. I had to find one more. So what?
So if you go to our department website, which is academics, business, and marketing, you can can see the professional selling major.
Yeah, I may have to get with Catherine.
It used to be loaded on this page.
I feel like they changed a lot of stuff.
Graduate programs, minors, here we go. Why don't they have it on here? I guess they have all of them, one page. It used to be linked individually, but they changed our entire website. So
Yeah,
if you go
they
here,
made a lot of changes recently.
yeah, professional selling, it's 18 hours. And you've got this course, you just have to have professional selling, advanced professional sales, negotiations, and then electives selected from that. But it's definitely a good program. I mean, it is definitely beneficial.
Okay, because the way that because I'm in PGM right now, and when I came into PGM, my gen eds were already done, and so I'm going to have PGM classes, but my business classes will all be done. So I may just have to fill out classes from there without.
Yeah, the PGM is one of the tougher for us to get people to do the minor because you have so few free electives
Right.
in that program.
I say, well, my electives are all done. It's just that last year of school, I'm gonna have to.
But what you could do is you can take the professional selling and advanced professional sales, and that gets you eligible for the sales team.
Oh, yeah.
And if you had those two and you go into a competition, that's another way of getting sort of the same place.
Yeah, because that's kind of like, because do you know what Primerica is?
Mhm.
I would say I'm trying to wrap my head around like
Let me
everything.
stop this video and the stream so that it's not.
So I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around everything and